causing problems with biodiversity, such as loss of habitat, landslides, flash flooding, not only affecting the plants and the animals that live there, but even the humans which live in cities and towns nearby. Understand that not only one does it harm the environment directly, but there is also a very large trickle-down effect as a result of these consequences, right? Such as intoxicated waters, which cannot be fully replenished as a result, and for those reasons, anything they try to say about reforestation is completely out of the debate. Understand that the status quo is insufficient. We have things such as poorly enforced legislation. We don't have taxes. In other words, the cost of polluting is incredibly low for these companies within the timber sector. Understand that fines are not sufficient simply due to the fact that the damage has already been done and that replenishing is something that is not possible. So understand the on-site government biodiversity-related taxes are the only way to overcome these issues. What is it that side government here today defends? Understand that we defend biodiversity-related taxes by the government towards these companies, right? This is a tax imposed on practices which harm biodiversity. If there was any biodiverse kind of crime done throughout your production process, you will suffer of this tax, such as excessive deforestation, extreme use of pesticides, poor waste management. This is paid during the distribution process, which means if your product, this bottle of water, destroyed any amount of biodiversity, this product would be taxed before it even hits the shelf. These individuals cannot sell their products unless they pay this tax first. Understand that the identification of this is integrated into the business process in a similar way like in Malaysia, how the halal industry is integrated into all food and beverage industries, right? In the same way, this will be integrated into the timber business procedures, such as auditing, routine checkups, reports, so on, so forth. Who is it exactly who will be taxed? We believe it is registered timber corporations, but the bigger focus of the debate should be large conglomerates simply due to the fact that they cause more harms. How much will they be taxed? Understand that this tax exists on a scale. It is a form of progressive taxing specifically for biodiversity matters in the timber sector, which means the more that you pollute, the more that you are going to have to pay. This is to ensure that it's not a slap on the wrist for those for companies which have more money and power, right? And so we believe that we can deter the large ones from doing it without harming the smaller companies who are unable to sustain it, right? Understand that where this money goes is one, to replenish obviously, but secondly, it also looks like funding these smaller companies which are willing to comply, which means companies are not only deterred from making the wrong decision, but now we are actively encouraging them to do the right thing, because that funding to achieve that sustainable development is something which we provide. And lastly, understand that this exists within the status quo, alongside all the other mechanisms such as fines and price ceilings, meaning that the likelihood of these companies wanting to hike their prices to get away with these taxes is very, very low and not possible in their world, right? Now, in my speech, 3 things. Number 1, I'll explain to you why the status quo specifically is so problematic. Second, why biodiversity is the only way to overcome problems. Number 3, why the comparative is insufficient. Now, why is it that the status quo is problematic? Understand that one, policy and legislation is incredibly weak. Things such as monitoring. This is because one, these countries, before I continue, understand that we believe that this motion exists within developing states because these are the states which suffer the most and rely the most on timber, and they suffer the most from issues such as deforestation. Anyways, continuing, on the issue of policy and legislation, understand that we have a big issue in enforcing them, and we don't have enough legislation to go with because these states often lack the resources. They are unable to maximize the enforcement even if that legislation exists. They are unable to introduce new legislation because issues such as biodiversity often get drowned out with all the other conflicts they have within their state. And number 3, they simply cannot afford to replenish damaged lands, especially when we're talking about states which have frequent flooding or they are just trying to brace themselves for the next landslide, right? Or even richer countries such as Japan, which simply constantly have to brace themselves for the next earthquake, right? Secondly, understand that activism itself has been ineffective so far. It is dependent on buy-in. That awareness already exists. People know we need to protect the environment. But even when we're able to mobilize these individuals, we are still unable to overcome the power of these conglomerates and their ability to lobby governments, because governments are simply more incentivized to back these conglomerates because the benefits economically are much, much higher. But sure, I think that you are.
Yeah, what are the current threats to biodiversity?
Deforestation, thank you. Next, third, corruption and accountability. Understand that the governments are susceptible to lobbying, as I've stated before this, right? They benefit from backing these conglomerates who bring in jobs, provide exports to other states, and timber MNC specifically bring in FDIs to the state. So the fact that these So what I'm trying to say is that these conglomerates still have that lobbying and negotiating power with the government, which allows them to get away with it, right? But lastly, understand that any other punishment that they try to propose are too late in the supply chain. Fines and lawsuits only happen after all the damage is done. Understand the burden on both sides here today. You must overcome the limited resources, the dependency on buying, the lobbying, and the where it exists in the supply chain in order to win this debate here today. Now, why is it that our biodiversity tax on the producers specifically is the only way? Listen to what? We are not dependent on resources. If anything, we actually bring in more resources, which allows us to invest in greener and sustainable methods of production. Right? Second, we are not dependent on buy-in. It does not matter what the people think. We do not need to pour that energy into mobilizing people because we have this clear-cut way through legislation. Right? Third, it is less susceptible to corruption and lobbying because the thing about a tax is that it's a non-negotiable. You can't go to court and say, actually, I think I should be taxed more or taxed less. It is a non-negotiable. You're never going to argue with the cashier about GST, and for those reasons, we're less susceptible to corruption or lobbying. However, even if in the case where this corruption happens and these individuals don't pay their tax, this is something which can easily be caught throughout the auditing process, and the likelihood of punishment is much higher than. Four, understand that we increase the cost of production towards these companies when polluting, meaning that these companies now cannot simply dilly-dally hike their prices and believe, you know what, we got away with it. That external cost that they are causing towards the environment and biodiversity is now internalized and must be paid by them, actively deterring them from engaging in these activities. Five, understand that it's a non-negotiable payment, as I said just now. But lastly, understand that it caters to the urgency of the situation. This is something done during the distribution process, and the threat of being unable to sell a product is the only thing that we believe is sufficient in deterring these people from even putting out the product in the first place. The only way for these people to make profit in this world is to lower the level of pollution. Now, why is it that their side can never claim their benefits? Claim our benefits. The best case scenario for them is that everyone is benevolent and finding is sufficient, right? But the damage has been done. We cannot focus on replenishing. We must get rid of the behavior from the root. And for all those reasons, government, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Welcoming Leader Robert.
Good afternoon, panel, and good afternoon, our government side. Today, first I want to start with a couple of responses, then I want to talk about the stance of my team, and then I'll go into my arguments. First things first, the stance of that the current status quo is not enough is a flawed argument because at the end of the day, we can actually continue to improve our system. That means bringing a lot more awareness to the people, which would then lead for a greater push for better regulations. The next thing is that when they talk about taxes, when we tax corporations, we must understand the fact that these people, if you were to push them too hard, then what's stopping them from just going underground and doing all these activities illegally? What's stopping them from hiding their operations and not paying, not reporting their taxes, right? And then worsening the situation, all right? Now first, I want to re-establish one thing. This timber sector, as we know, is incredibly important for the development, for human development. It is very much needed for our economy because everything we do basically has wood in it. Houses, buildings, day-to-day lives, schools, And so, whether we like it or not, this industry we need it, and no matter how hard we try, we cannot stop them from destroying biodiversity. And so our stance is that the existing countermeasures are, the status quo is enough, we just need to improve it, and that by adding on taxes, we end up causing many more problems than the ones that we're trying to solve. Now I'm going to go into two arguments. The first is that the biggest problem that we're going to be facing is corporate retaliation. Now, there are two types of companies, right? The companies that do end up adhering to the law, that try their best to log and also be mindful of the biodiversity that they are harming. But then there are also companies that do not care at all. And they log and they just destroy as much as possible to get the profits that they need. Now, in the best case scenario, let's say that we end up applying these taxes. These companies are going to end up hiding away their operations. They're not going to report their income or taxes. And everything's just going to go incognito. But the worst case scenario, this is terrible, is that these companies end up leaving the logging industry entirely. Why? Because by adding this industry by itself is already incredibly expensive to maintain and operate.
On choice.
But now you're just adding more expenditure to them, and it's going to cause this entire operation to be unfeasible. And so these companies end up leaving the logging industry and they opt for other business models. Now, when such a thing happens, the government ends up having to deal with two types of problems. The first is that now they have to deal with companies that are going incognito. They have to deal with a lot of illegal operations under the table, and you cannot monitor them. Now, the second problem and the worst problem is the fact that in terms of economy, the country is going to end up losing its income. Now, this is obviously going to affect the economy. This is going to affect everyone who is a part of the industry, from the regular workers to the workers in the company as well. And on top of that, the country is going to end up losing its foreign direct investment. So at the end of the day, by adding these taxes, we're going to end up causing more problems, even though we can actually solve them by improving on the current countermeasures that are enacted. With that, I'm proud to propose.
All right. Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Welcome, Deputy Prime Minister Gideon.
My speech in 3, 2, 1. Going straight to refutations. First, on the assumption from the opposition side that the status quo is enough. Firstly, they say that we are continuing to improve and awareness creates regulation. We already told you in Atifa's speech why status quo isn't enough and why this problem still exists. If status quo is enough, then you have to clarify to us why the problem still exists in status quo. But Atifa already said that this is how we fix the problem that is currently happening, and they just want to rely on status quo, saying that, oh, okay, we'll hope that one day it improves, right? But also, I understand that their mechanism will take more resources than our mechanism. I understand that on their side, they need to create more awareness to push for government change. Understand that first they didn't prove that that will happen, but second, even if that happens, it requires resources, more resources than actually our mechanism. So on the way then, right, just on mechanism, our mechanism needs less resources but creates more resources for the government to actually funnel back for the improvement of the timber industry, right? But also you said that we should be improving our current measures. They never suggest to us what does this improvement look like. We are suggesting an improvement which is to impose this tax on biodiversity related taxes, right? But second, on the idea on corporate retaliation. First, on how they will opt to do underground and illegal logging and escape auditing, right? Several refutations on this. First, Atifa already told you that it is impossible, it is less likely or hard to escape this auditing and to do underground and illegal logging, because understand, Atifa already told you that the auditing are done separately. The auditing are not done by member of government. It works like Jakim, right? Atifa told you, and it is to hold them accountable. But even if so, they can do it illegally. We already told you the fact that we impose this tax, we made it harder because now there will be more enforcement to actually cater to these timber activities that is happening, right? But also, most importantly, they didn't prove why is wasting all your resources on going underground is more appealing to companies than being taxed or reducing pollution, right? They didn't tell you why companies will opt to do it underground, risk all the fines if they got caught, then just opting to change and be better and be more sustainable, right? Moving on, 3 things in my speech. First, how taxation creates long-term and sustainable change in behavior of corporations. Second, how the money from the taxation can be refunneled to finding alternative methods for the timber industry. And thirdly, I'll prove to you how the money funnel will be used to rehabilitate the harm made by the timber industry, right? Okay, first thing I'll prove to you is why imposing taxes forces big corporations to reduce malpractice, right? First level of analysis. Why does these companies create malpractice in the first place? Why are they not sustainable? Two reasons, right? First, because currently they have leeway. Understand that they have the opportunity to do these bad behaviors. Because why? There is currently a lack of enforcement of the law. Understand that it's hard for government to regulate and also government habit and can't enforce because they don't have these enforcement bodies, right? But second, lack of accountability method. Understand that they're protecting status quo. In status quo, companies or corporations can easily get away with not following these regulations because they can lobby, they do horse trading, right? But second level of analysis then, why will taxation stop the malpractice, right? Understand that when we tax this company on a yearly basis based on an audit, these taxes are imposed on the profit of the company. Understand this is very important characterization, that these taxes will be imposed on the profit, meaning that this company yearly profit will be reduced. What does this mean? This means that they have no other option but to follow the requirements to avoid being taxed. Understand that Atifa already told you, people who pollute more or create more destruction get taxed more, and people who are sustainable get taxed less. Understand that they will have extra effort to be taxed less to have more profit, because understand that these corporations are profit minded, right? But understand that they can't compensate for the loss through any other way. It is easier to comply than for them to actually do illegal logging or for them to actually pay the fines if they get caught, right? But understand, even this is a preamp. Even if on their side they say because we are taxing from the profit, then they will raise their product prices, we say that that is still a net benefit. Why? Because when a company raises the prices of their product, consumers will go to opt to a different company's product, meaning that they will choose the cheaper option. But then why is this company's product cheaper? Because they are more sustainable. Understand that then companies will be more sustainable to have more profit, to make their product cheaper, to get these customers, right? Better level of analysis then, why we encourage better behavior? Because companies are forced and encouraged to search for other alternatives. Only on our world, we see companies seeking out to collaborate with NGOs and companies to find alternative methods so that they don't get taxed, right? What are the impacts then? Twofold. First, that there will be long-term reminder of these companies to always be careful, be sustainable when they do the logging activities. Visualization looks like better following of regulations and minimizing harm harm to the biodiversity as much as possible, and also the sustainable practice of being a norm. Yes.
The timber industry is inherently dangerous towards the biodiversity. What is the sustainability logging actually look like?
Oh, thank you. I'll get to that. Okay. Second, refunding the money into finding better and more sustainable alternative methods to do timber industry. What is the visualization? What does sustainable in timber industry look like? First, during the growing process, this looks like sustainable planning. It looks like not using pesticides. It looks like natural fertilizers. During the logging, it looks like good selective management system. It looks like better enforcement of all these systems. During transportation, it looks like better energy efficient transportation, right? Why is this important? Because our aim is to always stop the malpractice that occur in the timber industry. To achieve that, we need these resources to find a green alternative. Understand that we can now reduce the carbon footprint from the timber industry. The impact is then long term. Understand the timber industry will always be sustainable because from the tax money, the government can flow for the creation or the innovation of more sustainable and green practices alternative in the timber industry. But then I'll prove to you why from the tax money we can rehabilitate the harm done by the malpractice. Visualization then. It looks like using money from this taxation to replant the trees and help the habitat that the timber industry had destroyed. The cleaning of rivers, the maintenance of biodiversity, this is all can be done by the money that is flowed from this tax. We can reverse the malpractice done throughout the years, and on the comparative then is that on-site opposition, they have less resources to fix all of these problems and companies will continue to be bad.
What's the main location?
My speech is going to be very simple. Firstly, I'm going to do some clarifications. Secondly, I'm going to talk about why this harms the economy and why exports of timber is going to be incredibly hard. Competing with every other country is going to be significantly worse, which means the total revenue of the industry is going to decrease, which means the amount of tax we're going to get from this, from the industry by itself decreases. And at the end of the day, I'm going to talk about why is it the current status quo is enough and there are existing pressures for you to be more sustainable, and why is it that creating more sanctuaries, gazetting more permanent permanent rainforests is a good method to protect biodiversity, and trying to have more sustainable forestry does not involve you trying to look out for more of this illegal poaching, and it's going to actually have better what their visualization of what more sustainable forestry actually looks like is fine enough when you already use the existing forests that have already biodiversity destroyed, and you just keep using those lands again and again. So first then, in terms of clarification, what are the actual threats to biodiversity? They say that logging is, part of the threat, which is correct. But I want you to note that a lot of the process of trying to gazette, forests or trying to say which forests are able to actually be deforested have already gone through the extensive process of researching, going through the understanding of every single diversity or the complexity of the biodiversity that exists within that area. That means they have already done research, and the areas that can be deforested are the ones that already have minimal damages towards biodiversity. Therefore, now then, what are the actual problems towards biodiversity in terms of logging? It is the undocumented illegal poaching and illegal logging of all of these things. The very nature of these things going under the law means the fact that the very analysis they talk to you about, when there is a lacking of enforcement, means the fact that you try to detect all of these illegal logging as well as poaching means it's also incredibly hard for you to enforce these ideas. Therefore, the only benefit that they get is they're going to tax the already good existing companies, but they still are not able to cater towards the illegal logging as well as the poaching that exists. Therefore, the biodiversity that does not get detected in these areas is the problem that we're trying to solve, panel. Therefore, I'm going to tell you why that later down the line is going to improve when you have the technological development, the societal development and understanding of the environment and why it's a growing importance for them to appeal to the MPs and try to have more inclusive indigenous participation in trying to surveil the area and trying to be part of the enforcement programs, and that's going to allow for better enforcement, which is part of organic growth, which you don't need taxes to implement. So now then, going into the harms of what happens when you tax this industry. Given the context that you talked about, one of the most significant, significant aspects of Malaysia is the fact that you're exporting timber, right? But the problem is, when you tax these things, the cost of production increases. Therefore, the price at which you sell it to every other country is also increased. For this country, you're going to have to compete with China, for example, and trying to sell it to like the US and Europe, for example. The problem then is the fact that the option of the cheaper Chinese labor who's not going to adhere to these things are always going to be the more appealing options for you to purchase timber from. So what does that impact the exporting timber industry in Malaysia? You're going to have less exports, and you're going to have a decrease in operational, an increase in operational costs, and that means the total profits that you get is decreased. Like I said before, that also means the tax you get is decreased. Yeah, I'll take one.
So what you're telling me is that in your case, you assume benevolence of everyone except illegal loggers and poachers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. The fact of the matter is, it's not benevolent. Like I said, the timber industry, in its very nature, harms the biodiversity. Alright? So what we're trying to do now is try to mitigate it at the end of the day. So now I'm going to talk about the alternative that we propose on our side, or rather, how why status quo is more than enough. So, first thing to note here is how does the process of gazetting new forests or making new permanent rainforests and sanctuaries necessarily work? Understanding the different animals that exist, the endangered animals that exist within that area, means the fact that this area is required to be protected. This already exists within current laws, and these things mean the fact that the forests in which we are trying to cater to aren't exactly these things. So, how then are we going to change the main causes of deforestation in these areas? Is the fact that we're going to have the increasing pressures of status quo, like technological developments, for example. How does technological developments in status quo allow for better enforcement of existing laws? One, you have satellite imagery, for example, to understand, on the vast areas of the earth, on how, no matter how big the forest is, you're able to identify the trends of changes in that area. So over time, you're able to see where these things happen.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'm going to talk about the implementation of better, drone technology, for example, which allows you to traverse the very different environments in there. The terrain is never a problem now when you have investments and R&D in these things. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about the indigenous participation in these things. Indigenous communities within these protected forests themselves have the inherent knowledge, inherited knowledge that have been passed down for generations to understand what animals look like, why animals flee away from certain areas, and these are trends that shows that something is very wrong and that biodiversity or the ecosystem is being disrupted. Therefore, the inclusivity of indigenous communities allows for these better enforcement mechanisms. So now, to engage with the ideas on why is this not happening right now, first thing to note here, the idea of sustainability in the forestry industry hasn't been entirely old. The fact that technology has always been a barrier. The fact that big corporations always had the money to lobby in order for other things. But recognize the difference now. There is an increasing trend for people to prioritize indigenous community. There is an increasing trend for people to be more environmentally sustainable. These are all existing pressures that exist internally as well as externally in the country for you to be able to continue the development of the forest industry. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you justify the fact that your mechanism uses like 10,000 times more resources than ours?
Yeah, so firstly, like I said already, the fact of the matter is governments are non-profits and you're not supposed to be making profits. You already have tax revenue from every other industry, and the fact that the global population feels to believe that environment is, climate change is something that's very important means the fact that you have the amount of resources. Second thing to note is, do they claim to really have the largest number of benefit, like the largest number of resources they have to tax and refunding it into all of these investments? I already told you why is it that tax revenue is only on the profits, and if you don't get profit, then you're not going to be able to get large number of taxes anyways. And given that your exports decrease, you're not going to have that much money to invest into R&D. Given that the world will have better technology, better exports, and better reputation on the international stage, investments and FDI will go towards them, and Malaysia is not going to get any. Therefore, we don't think they can claim the benefit of having a lot of resources at the end of the day. So then, what is the key takeaway panel from my speech? Firstly, in terms of the harm towards the community, you're going to have less people participating in the timber industry. The timber industry is going to be less profitable. The Malaysian country or every other developing country that they talk about that depends on timber is not going to be able to get the largest number of exports, therefore less money to develop that country. Finally, in terms of status quo, it's more than enough because there exists pressures externally as well as internally to allow for the better development of the timber industry to be more sustainable in enforcing the illegal poaching, which is the main driver of biodiversity loss in Malaysia. Thank you, Prato.
Thank you, Yellow. Welcoming government quickly.
three questions in my speech. Whether timber and or like nature is inherently harmful, whether the timber industry is inherently harmful. Number two, whether it is likely their mechanism will work. And third, just like whether corporations will in fact retaliate. Let's begin with just whether the timber industry is inherently harmful. They tell you yes, because it does in fact include practices just such as deforestation, and that's just generally how the industry runs. What did we tell you and they failed to engage with? We told you generally this is wrong and it is not inherently harmful because there are in fact practices to reverse, say, problems with biodiversity. We have given you a plethora of mechanisms as to why this is likely to occur and what are ways this can occur. We told you things such as reforestation, selective deforestation, and just everything that Hanafi told you. By virtue of that alone, we tell you the important thing to note that is this. On our side, we fight for two metrics. Not only which side better improves the economy, but also which side better improves the environment. Their side generally tells you that this debate should be framed in a way where only the economy should be taken into consideration, and even if you were to buy everything they told you, they can only win on that metric alone. With that being said, we told you why you have won on both. Second, whether it is likely their mechanism will work, something that was heavily substantiated in their second speaker, right? They told you generally that their mechanism is of two. Number one, that they can have new reforestation and the creation of rainforests. And generally, that they will have abilities to audit by virtue of like drone technologies. We tell you generally that this is not mutually exclusive to their side, but more importantly, that there is not enough fundings for them to even have these facilities in the very first place. We told you on our side exclusively why we do have avenues to receive these revenues from these taxations, which can then be funneled back into sustainable practices for not only small businesses, but big businesses which do in fact comply to, say, environmental good. Furthermore, panel, we tell you the good outcome of this very mechanism is contingent on the idea that they can tackle the problem in the very first place. We had posited to you in first that the problem in general is that big corporations are ones who are in fact abusing the environment. On their side of the world, all they do is create new forestations or new rainforests. We tell you, okay, sure, these are the very same new forests and or rainforests which will later be abused by these big corporations on your side. And by virtue of that alone, panel, it will be on their side of the world when nothing will in fact improve. Rather, new forests will come out, and eventually big conglomerates will eventually be able to either lobby to destroy these forests and or just continue to exist, and the problem persists. Their mechanism fails and or at its very best is mutually exclusive. Let's then talk about corporate retaliation. What did we hear on their side? We heard two things generally. A, that corporations will likely be ones who will go incognito, and B, that corporations will leave the timber industry, and that's the bulk of their case. Let's talk about the first, right? Corporations will go incognito. Their first speaker gives you zero structural reasons as to why it is likely these corporations will suddenly go incognito. We told you on our side that auditings would in fact occur. This means that the government is carrying out extremely close monitoring as to how these corporations will in fact be acting. And it's by virtue of this auditing alone where these individuals won't be able to say go incognito, especially not to the extent where they're able to hide their malpractices. But number two, the investigations will be going on based on of say like reports. We told you that it is when Sungai Kim Kim is polluted, regardless whether these individuals go incognito or not, there will be reports and people will find out. And it's by virtue of this alone, in these timber industries who are in fact acting on malpractices will never be able to hide. This is important, panel, because opposition has a burden. The opposition's burden then is to prove why without our meticulous auditing that these corporations go through on our world, their side wouldn't therefore go incognito. And they failed to prove that to you. So we tell you on our side, it is highly unlikely these corporations will be able to go incognito, but they also fail to tell you why in their world it's not just symmetrical. We tell you it's likelier there. Why is it corporations will not leave the timber industry? This is extremely undersubstantiated. They just told you generally, when the prices of their production increases, they will automatically want to leave. We tell you this is false because since the beginning of Atifa's speech, we told you these corporations are for profit. Therefore, it would make no sense why you would A, want to forego all these potential profits you could be making, upwards of billions of dollars, just because your current production prices had suddenly increased due to these taxations. But B, why you would want to forego billions of dollars worth of assets which you already have across the country operating in a lot of different factories, and why these corporations will certainly be willing to then leave the industry all of a sudden. Also noting that these assets are extremely specified to the timber industry in particular, which means they cannot suddenly then transfer into other industries easily and then carry out malpractices there. Panel, we told you clearly that there's zero incentive structures for these corporations to want to leave, especially considering the lack of profits that they could therefore be making, considering these taxes and considering the amount of access of assets which already exist. But even if, panel, they were to leave, we tell you this is a good thing. Before that, any POIs? No POIs. We tell you, panel, generally, even if they do leave, this is a great thing. Why is this true, panel? We tell you this is true because A, you're taking out a big player within the industry who does in fact carry out malpractices. This means, panel, the side effects which had initially occurred in their world, in where individual corporations which are massive conglomerates will now suddenly leave. And this is that very point in which more of your rainforests are able to survive, and more of your timber industries are able to be ones who are in fact good and or say benevolent actors. B, that corporations who are sustainable will be the ones who are celebrated and will be the ones who remain. Considering the biggest player is now out, and the players who are, according to their logic, incentivized to stay, being the ones who are not taxed highly, the ones being sustainable, will therefore be celebrated. And it will be these individuals who will be able to co-opt these markets and will be able to co-opt all the purchasers and consumers. We tell you this is a good thing because these are the same consumers who will be purchasing from an actor who is not therefore, say, acting on malpractices and are therefore polluting the environment, panel. But we also told you that FDI in our world can then remain because all of this demand will still remain. They fail to prove to you why somehow this demand will continue. We tell you this demand can therefore be co-opted by these very good sustainable businesses and they can later be celebrated. These FDIs therefore will be going to businesses who are in fact good actors, who are in fact actors who can therefore save the environment. There's one side here which has in fact tackled both mechanisms or metrics, panel. It's us. Thank you.
Thank you, Government Whip. Welcoming Opposition Whip.
Ladies and gentlemen, this debate boils down to two possible goals that each side wants to fulfill. Number one, most importantly, is which side actually promotes the safety of biodiversity even better, and number two, who actually in the long run helps the developing countries, either it be in terms of environment, but also in terms of their economy overall by the end of the day. Now before I begin, a very good day to all. So basically how my speech is going to work is I'm going to cover three main things. Number one is on the idea that which side actually protects that biodiversity better and why is it our side. Secondly is on how if we opt for improving status quo without actually imposing taxes, but they are like what they are proposing is much better for the status quo itself. And lastly on how which side actually helps developing nations, either it be economically or environmentally. So now let's talk about biodiversity. Which side makes it better, right? Because under their side, their main idea here is that by imposing all these taxes, you're able to make it harder for timber activity to actually occur because it becomes more expensive. And secondly is that because of that, timber industries are now more encouraged to do better. Now we tell you that there are two particular situations that are most likely to occur. Because we have to understand here, number one, is that timber sector is a very huge one. It's a very huge industry with lots of capital to back it up. So the idea here is, for example, you have one particular tax that is low enough in which these corporations can just pay it off. Because they have money, they are willing to do so, they are willing to just pay the taxes. Thank you, willing to pay the taxes to ensure that they are able to
to do production even further. Now, why do we tell you that they are most likely to opt into this option of just paying off the taxes rather than just improving their entire practices? Because on the other side, we tell you that the main reason why corporations will not opt to just pay the taxes is because it creates it's more expensive. Why not just focus on the focus on investing in this particular practices, right? Because one thing that they fail to consider is the fact that if you want to overhaul an entire system that you've been following for decades in terms of making it more sustainable, there are other repercussions that come afterwards. Now, what are these repercussions? We tell you that it's not only about money, it's also about time. It's also about you retraining your workers to actually adapt to this particular work methodology. Now, these are the things that will cause some type of downtime for these corporations, and this is a loss that they are not willing to take, especially because there are other people within the market that are further ahead of them in comparison to whatever they are in this particular situation. So because of it's too much of a hassle, the possibility of them to actually just pay off the taxes is there. Now, another situation that could happen is that what if the taxes are too high? That means it actually affects them in which they can no longer just pay it off, and they have to just improve themselves, right? Now, because we already told you about how it is very, very hard for them to actually implement it in the short term, right? Especially because we understand how timber industry is a very competitive industry. We tell you, both my speakers already told you about the idea that the likelihood for them to go underground is much more likely to happen. Now, on the plus side, they tell you it's very hard for them to do so, because why should they risk doing it in the first place? Now, the question becomes here, why on earth is illegal logging still existing now? Because we have to understand here, when it comes to illegal loggers, these are the illegal loggers that are backed by already well-known corporations that exist in status quo. Take example of Samling Corporations in Sarawak, right? So Samling Corporation is a 440 company. Everyone knows about them, but what they are known for is that they are known for going for illegal logging. This is something that they opt for because this is more profitable for them. Because if we live in an idealistic world in saying that, hey, if I as a corporation, I want to gain more profits, I have two options, the fast one or the slow one. The slow one, I have to invest in all of this new technology, new methodologies. I have to invest in money, in time, in resources. It's going to take too much time, and I'm going to lose my profit. In comparison to the other ways in which you already have this kind of, you already have all of the resources needed. You don't have to change everything. You just have to make it hidden. And then this is something that they will do most often or not. And because of the fact that this is something that will happen based on my analysis, it is harder for the government to actually regulate logging in the first place. So whatever kind of benefits that they are trying to propose in terms of protecting biodiversity is harder to happen in the first place. Now, we tell you why is it on the outside improvement is better, or why is it like biodiversity is better on the outside, right? So both my speakers talked about how in terms of alternative options, we take whatever we have in status quo, we take the countermeasures and we make it better. Because here is the hypocrisy. On the other side, they tell you about the fact that, hey, at least on the outside, we're able to do all of this more legislation, more auditing for these new taxes in comparison to that. Why can we not do that in our world in which we are able to use more monetary resources to improve this kind, improve legislation, improve enforcement? Why is it only exclusive under the outside? This is something that they have never explained. Now, even if they want to talk about the idea that, hey, they are able to do that because now they have more resources, because they tax all these corporations, they have more income to actually fund this. Now, the problem here is when it comes to taxing people, right, governments are never going to be transparent where this tax money is going to. If you tax a particular area, a particular sector, how are you as an individual, as a consumer, or whatever, right, are able to ensure that kind of money is invested back into the infrastructure, into any kind of investment that helps in sustainable logging, it helps in forestation, it helps in whatever kind of benefits that they are trying to promote. Now, this is something that has never been clarified by them in ensuring this check and balance. Now, this is why we see here that the benefit of making sure that the current system is better is still here. But at the very end, at the very least on the outside, we ensure that whatever kind of backlash that happens with taxing this corporation is less likely to occur. At the same time, we're still able to improve this current status quo. No, thank you. Now let's talk about the idea about who ensures the betterment of developing nations, right? Because like on the outside, we tell you about the fact that if you tax all these industry, all these companies, the likelihood for them to leave is that. Now, under their side, they tell you that, hey, they will not leave because it's such a multi-million-dollar industry. Why should they risk this particular investment? Now, the answer here is simply as this. Now, you have two particular pressures put into this particular industry. You have all the regulations that you want to improve. Let's take you have all these regulations you want to improve. You have more stricter enforcement, and at the same time, you have more taxes that actually bottles how much they can produce. Now, these kind of things, I'm a corporation. This is something in the circumstances that I do not want to operate in. If I find that another country is more lenient, it's going to give me more profit, I will go there. If I find that another industry, another sector is more lenient, I will go there. Because the idea here is that too much pressure is never good, and this is where we have to be very strategic in what we actually implement onto this particular industry. Even if the best case it works, right, the idea here is it's not flexible. When it comes to taxes, right, it's fixed. You cannot negotiate around it. You have to adhere to whatever it is that the government is putting. But when it comes to regulations that are existing, it acts as guidelines. It acts as something that they can work around with. They can understand how on earth are they going to actually improve their working method. Now, based on all those reasons, I'm a bit more proud to oppose.
Give me like 10 seconds. I really need to make a run to the toilet. But I'll be back in a while.
Sorry, I feel like you. I was looking at his time when I was on phone.
Oh, it's okay.
The tip of the-
Is that live stream or YouTube?
No, recording.
Oh, it's recording.
Oh, this is going to be the recording.
Just want to promote this one.
Yeah, when is I?
Hi, we're from IIUM Debate Club, and here today we'd like to promote to you IIUM Open. Woo! It's IIUM Open will be happening on the 9th to 10th of December 2023 at the IIUM Combat Campus. We have categories open and novice, and it will be in British Parliamentary. So do register so we can have trauma together, and you can get details on our Instagram at IIUM Grades. Thank you.
This is what capitalism does. When there's free time, throw it out.
Sorry, what? Alright, I'll reply here.
Okay, so two considerations in this debate. First, I would say the impact to the economy, and then secondly, and the more important part of the debate, the impact to biodiversity and who better trying to solve this issue, right? So firstly, in terms of the impact towards the economy, right, I think there's very little engagement towards the idea that given that now you're going to tax the industry is going to be performing less, and on the international trade of scale, they're going to have less revenue on net. Therefore, the amount of money they're going to get through this tax revenue is minimal at best, given that circumstance. And given that they are very happy to have industries, or to have players leaving the industry entirely, we think the entire proposition to have implementation of tax and the implementation of auditing is all irrelevant compared to the existing methods that exist in status quo. The harm then trickles down towards the people who have a very strong reliability on this industry. This was all mentioned within my speech previously as well as Aisha's speech. The people now don't have the ability to develop. The people's interest in the governments now decrease because the immediate priorities of economics is decreased, and this timber industry within the country is unable to develop. The FDI that no longer goes towards the developing countries, but rather goes towards other countries and other competitors, and that's a harm towards the economy. So taking that, we think is clear. So secondly, in terms of the impact towards biodiversity, right? And there are several points of contention here. First is the fact that how is enforcement going to work? On our side, we see there are existing pressures to say that enforcement is getting better. The fact that politicians now have a vested interest to be more accountable because of the fact that the people have more importance on it. So secondly, is the fact that existing measures also have the increased participation of the indigenous community. The fact that investments on technology that were previously unavailable are now available. These are all ideas that show that the status quo right now is quite enough and quite sufficient in order for you to at least mitigate the harms of already on board logging. The fact that biodiversity protection is already in the law, and the fact that you have already gazetted forests according to it. So now then, the biggest point of idea as to what causes the most destruction towards biodiversity is the undocumented, unable to be tracked, and unenforceable by their own very metrics because of the difficulties of illegal poaching that occurs in very rural and remote areas of the forest. How then are they going to solve this? Because taxation really only works on the existing conglomerates and other businesses. So we tell you on our side, when you have the implementation of this tax, it's going to force more of these players to go incognito. Incognito how? Anas already explained in his speech that it is not just the fact that these companies will disappear, but rather these companies will provide contracts towards other players who are less accountable compared to them because of their lower levels of notoriety. Anas, I think, clearly explains to you that. Finally, in terms of why existing measures of biodiversity is much likely to work without the implementation of tax. Because firstly, you're able to gazette more forests, you're able to gazette more, more rainforests in Malaysia and create sanctuaries for these animals in these areas. The very nature of you putting your hands away from these things and letting the indigenous community patrol these areas means the fact that the biodiversity enforcement as well as enforcement of law is much better. But at the end of the day, panel, recognize that the timber industry is still going to function as normal because they're going to cycle towards the previous used lands as well as the timber that they have replanted, and they only operate within areas where biodiversity is already destroyed. Therefore, on net, we think biodiversity is much more protected on our side where we can gazette more land and we can have a better timber industry as a whole. Therefore, the only way in which you can have the development of the timber industry for you to be sustainable is to at first prioritize the profits and operations. They cannot co-opt these benefits because their very nature is limiting the implementation of existing strategies. You want tax revenue from these corporations in the timber industry, but the timber industry cannot live, they cannot have the money. Putting the cart before the horse is the biggest problem of government into this debate. Very proud to oppose.
Welcoming reply.
Do you want to come in or do you want to start? Can come in the next block. What's that talking outside? Maybe you can show.
I think they take down their entire case in 20 seconds. Listen, first what they said is that the big problem in this debate is illegal logging that cannot be tracked. And then they said the solution is to make new rainforests and drone technology. Notice how the problem and solution alone do not align, and with that, they are out of the debate. 3 clashes in debate here today. What is the main problem of this debate? Number 2, which side overcomes issues within the status quo? And number 3, which side better influences conglomerate behavior? First and foremost, what really is the burden of the debate? Because we've told you again and again, due to the magnitude of biodiversity issues and the way that it's impacting not just animals, but also the people who live in the surroundings, that should be the focus of the debate. But they've told us that it's the economy and the illegal logging. Fine, we'll be charitable. What they tell you is that everyone else will be benevolent and have done their due diligence, and therefore there is no need to overcome illegal logging. However, they then contradict themselves, saying that this illegal logging is backed by conglomerates. Apparently, Anas said that they will pay illegal poachers to do it for them. No, he didn't. That was you, Daryl, in reply. But also, they say that there's a need to ensure these exports, to ensure that these timber companies continue to buy products from your country, right? This is a burden that they pushed on themselves. The idea that we're going to lose FDI, the idea that we're going to have more illegal logging, but they failed to prove it through and through. Both illegal logging and the competition in the market are 2 things not so in their world. Now, why don't we win even when it comes to their metrics? Number 1, why we overcome illegal logging is because if the corporations are the ones backing it, and every single product, even if they hire these people to do it and do it under the covers, things such as auditing, so on and so forth, these are things which can easily be pointed out and they can get fined or taxed for it. Which means if they do get caught, they'll get taxed. If they hide it, they'll get caught anyways, and they're gonna get taxed. Anyways, next, why is it that the economy is better in our world, right? Number 1, understand that things such as tax revenue only achievable through our tax mechanism exists. But also, we believe that this metric in and of itself does not necessarily matter. Because if these people leave, these harmful companies which continue to destroy the infrastructure of this nation leave, then fine. Because that damage is now no longer our responsibility. Second, which side overcomes the issues in the status quo? They've given us a few mechanisms, right? So I'll focus on that for the sake of charitability. They talked about new rainforest, drone tech, and raising awareness. First and foremost, new rainforest, right? This is a mass use of resources which they have not justified the source for, or why in any way in the spirit of this motion they are allowed to have a mechanism which takes so much more resources than us, right? But also, this does nothing to pressure the corporations who are responsible for the problems we have in status quo. Because we told you that, second, they talked about drone tech, again, resources. In the very first speech, we told you that this debate exists in developing states and that went unchallenged. Additionally, we told you that replenishing is insufficient due to the fact that it's not the same as planting just a tree. When you replant those trees and replant that rainforest, in no way can you bring back the wildlife that lived there. For those reasons, we told you replenishing is insufficient. They have not justified why replenishing and using that amount of resources is justified anyways. Lastly, they kind of mentioned about raising awareness. This is dependent on buy-in. First speaker already talked about that. Lastly, which side better influences conglomerate behavior? The same conglomerate which they acknowledged were backing the illegal logging that they say is such a big problem, right? They told us, one, corporate retaliation, that they will go underground. This is something which is asserted and they never justified why these conglomerates would be willing to go through the process of taking all their resources and pushing it underground rather than just paying the damn tax, right, or adhering. But lastly, they told us that that will only be a slap on the wrist because they can pay it off. We see that one, we already told you it's progressive taxing, which means these conglomerates are much more likely to have to pay a very, very large amount of taxes. But another thing is that even if they just pay it off, this is still a good thing because through our mechanism, this money is refunded back into other companies which are more sustainable, allowing them to achieve better and cheaper versions of sustainable products. And for all those reasons, side with government.
Thank you. For the debate, please comment on the hands and we'll see you
Is this a silent round?
Yeah, okay, means that round.
Are we doing the whole battle?
I'm doing one for the